Hello and welcome to the Atheist Lowdown. Clinton failed to energize secular voters, Trump makes troubling cabinet appointments, an Indonesian governor faces charges of blasphemy, New Zealand atheists march to celebrate our ancestors, and I interviewed John S. about We Agnostics, Atheists, and Freethinkers International AA Convention here in Austin, Texas. Those are the headlines for the week of Saturday, December 10th, 2016.
This is Atheist Lowdown with Mark Vanderbrink.
In our first story this week, exit polls show evangelicals turned out for Donald Trump by a higher margin than secular voters supported Hillary Clinton. Despite demonstrating great ignorance of and lack of piety toward Christianity, evangelicals thought Trump would make a good commander-in-chief. Evangelical support for the Republican candidate was 3 points better than Bush had in 2004 and Romney in 2012, and garnered 7% more than McCain in 2008. Secular support for a Democratic candidate, on the other hand, was the lowest since 2004 at just 68%. The Washington Post speculates that antipathy toward Clinton and the prospect of a more conservative Supreme Court motivated evangelicals. However, the secular electorate was not as enthusiastic about Clinton or the way the Democrats presented progressive issues. While Donald Trump has nominated numerous unqualified and/or potentially dangerous individuals for high-level cabinet positions, 4 should be of particular concern to secular-minded citizens. For Education Secretary, he has tapped religious conservative Betsy DeVos, who is an advocate for school choice or vouchers and the privatization of the American school system, which many fear is aimed at publicly funding Christian schools. American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten called DeVos the most ideological anti-public education nominee put forward since President Carter created a cabinet-level Department of Education. In nominating DeVos, Trump makes it loud and clear that his education policy will focus on privatizing, defunding, and destroying public education in America. It should also be noted that she is married to Dick DeVos, son of the founder of Christian multi-level marketing company Amway, which has been criticized as a cult-like legal pyramid scheme. The appointment is in line with what Trump promised on the campaign trail, where he proposed using a third of the department's budget for a voucher program. Mother Jones reports that a voucher model pushed by Vice President-elect and current Indiana Governor Mike Pence is a $135 million program which almost exclusively benefits private religious schools, ranging from those teaching the Quran to Christian schools teaching creationism and the Bible as literal truth, at the expense of regular and usually better-performing public schools. Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions has been nominated for Attorney General. According to Americans United, Sessions has called separation of church and state an extra-constitutional doctrine and a recent thing that is unhistorical and unconstitutional. He supports banning Muslims from entering the country, school vouchers, displays of the cross and 10 Commandments on government property, and opposes marriage equality. He also had this to say about secular government. We are at a period of secularization in America that I think is very dangerous. It erodes the very concept of truth, the very concept of right and wrong, and there are people out there who enjoy attacking people who follow biblical directives. Former presidential candidate Ben Carson, seen here with his buddy Christ, may be our next Housing and Urban Development Secretary. This despite zero government experience, having no known interest or knowledge in the subjects the position requires, and his own statement that he is unqualified for a cabinet position because, quote, the last thing he would want to do is take a position that could cripple the presidency. Furthermore, Carson erroneously thinks there is a ban on Christianity in schools, is for vouchers, and thinks the best education is homeschooling. Also, as you will see in the following clips, he doesn't understand the Big Bang, thinks the pyramids were used for storing grain, and that the theory of evolution is the work of the devil.
Now, what about the Big Bang theory? I find the Big Bang really quite fascinating. I mean, here you have all these highfalutin scientists, and they're saying that there was this gigantic explosion and everything came into perfect order. Now, these are the same scientists who go around touting the second law of thermodynamics, which is entropy, which says that things move toward a state of disorganization. So now you're going to have this big explosion and everything becomes perfectly organized. And when you ask them about it, they say, well, we can explain this based on probability theory. Because if there's enough big explosions over a long enough period of time, over billions and billions of years, one of them will be the perfect explosion. And I say, so what you're telling me is if I blow a hurricane through a junkyard enough times, over billions and billions of years, eventually after one of those hurricanes, there'll be a 747 fully loaded and ready to fly. Well, but I mean, it's even more ridiculous than that, because our solar system, not to mention the universe outside of that, is extraordinarily well organized to the point where we can predict 70 years away when a comet is coming. Now, that type of organization to just come out of an explosion? I mean, you want to talk about fairy tales.
My own personal theory is that Joseph built the pyramids in order to store grain. Now, all the archaeologists think that they were made for the pharaoh's graves, but, you know, it would have to be something awfully big when you stop and think about it. And I don't think it would just disappear over the course of time to store that much grain. And when you look at the way the pyramids are made, with many chambers that are hermetically sealed, they would have to be that way for a reason. And, you know, various scientists have said, well, you know, there were alien beings that came down and they had special knowledge, and that's how they were able to, you know, it doesn't require an alien being when God is with you.
I personally believe that this theory that Darwin came up with was something that was encouraged by the adversary.
Theocrat and former Secretary of State of Ohio, Kenneth Blackwell, has been tapped for domestic policy advisor. He is a paid senior fellow for family empowerment for the James Dobson-founded ultra-conservative Christian lobbying organization, the Family Research Council. In 2013, Blackwell led a fight to cut $40 billion in food stamps, claiming Jesus was against the program. The governor of the Indonesian Special Capital Region of Jakarta has been indicted for blasphemy. Governor Ahok was campaigning for re-election when he told voters not to be deceived by a Quranic verse which forbids non-Muslims from being leaders.
Maybe in your heart you think you couldn't vote for me, but you're being lied to by using Al-Ma'idah 51.
After a video of the speech went viral, hardline Muslims led 100,000 protesters who rioted and called for his arrest. Despite the 1945 Constitution making Indonesia an ostensibly secular nation, under a 1965 blasphemy law, 200 people have been charged, with only one acquittal. As an ethnic Chinese Christian, Ahok's rise to governor was a progressive step toward tolerance and diversity in the 88% Muslim nation. On a lighter note, New Zealanders held an atheist pride march in Dunedin on November 16th to, quote, emphasize the uncertainty of all knowledge and caution against all kinds of hype, which can only lead to disappointment. They also aimed to celebrate the proud atheist, someone who was not obnoxious and lived in harmony with those people who believed in God. The event was organized by Dr. Craig Hilton, who wore an ape costume and on the steps of St. Paul's Cathedral gave a sermon about the genealogy of humans. Hilton hopes it will become an annual event and is going to try and spread the idea to other cities. Looks like a fun way to dialogue with theists and bring awareness to atheism. The We Agnostics, Atheists, and Freethinkers International AA Convention, or WAAFT AA, was held here in Austin, Texas on November 11th through the 13th. WAAFT, quote, provides an international service network and a central location for sharing resources to support agnostics, atheists, and freethinkers in AA, and to make AA as a whole more inclusive. WAAFT hopes to eliminate the cultural bias against non-believers that sometimes exists in AA, and feel that through sharing our experience, strength, and hope, non-believers, we will help widen the gateway to recovery for all, making AA even more accessible and welcoming to a greater number of people. Joining me today to talk about the convention is the very patient John S. Hello, John. Welcome to the Lowdown.
Hey, Mark. Good to be here.
Oh, it's great. Thank you for joining us. I just read a bit of a description that WAAFT has on their website. Is there anything you'd like to add? What is WAAFT?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for reading that. WAAFT stands for We Agnostics, Atheists, and Freethinkers. And We Agnostics actually is a chapter from the book Alcoholics Anonymous. It was a chapter that most of us atheists, agnostics, and freethinkers don't take very kindly to, because it's a chapter that really tries to convert us, telling us that, you know, we can move from our position of atheism and agnosticism to one of belief, that belief in a higher power supernaturally is necessary. So it's not a chapter that we like, but we've kind of taken the name because We Agnostics tells the rest of AA, first of all, that, you know, we're part of Alcoholics Anonymous, but also having that word agnostics in there lets people know that we are a meeting for agnostics, atheists, and freethinkers. We've found that a lot of the central offices that list meetings for their local communities won't put a special designation for our meetings to let people know that we're meetings for atheists and agnostics. So a lot of our groups will have in our name either We Agnostics or Freethinker or Atheist, so that people know that these are special groups for non-believers. And AA has a history of special purpose groups. We have special purpose groups for gays and lesbians. We have special purpose groups for young people in AA. We have special purpose groups for pilots, for example, for Native Americans. So there's a long history of this. So anyway, yeah, we've kind of claimed that mantle, that We Agnostics as who we are within AA.
Well, that's fantastic. Okay, so as far as the conventions here in Austin, what were some of the featured events, and what did you think were highlights?
Okay. Well, this was the second convention that we've had, the second international convention. The first was in November of 2014. It was held in Santa Monica, California. And this convention held in Austin, Texas. We actually had a larger turnout than the previous convention. We had like 400 people there. The highlights, I think, were the featured speakers. We had 3 of them. We had a woman from New York, Deidre, who gave a really excellent talk about the history of special purpose groups in AA. And she went through the history of some of the challenges that, like, African Americans faced getting involved and integrated in AA. It wasn't easy for them. She talked about some of the struggles that atheists and agnostics faced and how our groups came to be. It was a very interesting history. Then we also had one of the founders of WAAFT AA, Pam W., speak. And she talked about her experience in recovery, which is what we do in AA. We just talk about, our story. She shared her story, but she also talked about, the founding of WAAFT AA and how it all got started. And then we had a gentleman from Olympia, Washington, Pat N., who has been sober for, I think, well over 30 years or so. And he has some early connections with the We Agnostics groups that were starting off in Los Angeles back in the 80s. His brother was one of the early members of those groups. But anyway, he shared his story and talked about what is going on in the Pacific Northwest, which is pretty incredible. They have a real vibrant atheist and agnostic AA community out there. So that was great. Then we had a lot of, besides some featured speakers, we had a lot of workshops and panels where people discussed everything from like Stoicism in AA to, secular steps to, what it is to be an atheist in AA. We had some business type things that we discussed, like, what are we going to call ourselves going forward? How are we going to integrate with the rest of AA? All of this kind of stuff. So that was great. But for me, it's always what happens between the speakers and the panels and the workshops. It's all the conversations you have with people in between that I think are the most valuable experience of all. So.
Sure, yeah. You talked about Santa Monica. That was 2 years ago? Is it every 2 years?
It was 2 years, 2014, 2 years ago. So we have our convention every 2 years.
Okay. And there were 300 people at that convention. There were about 400 this year. Why do you think that is, and how have you been facilitating that growth?
Well, I think what's really amazing about us in particular, what I find interesting about us secularists in AA is I think that we're really very good about using the internet and social media to stay connected and to organize, probably more so than other segments of AA. And so we get the word out over the internet. I work at a site, AA Beyond Belief, that gets probably 10 to 15,000 views per month. And then we have a podcast, and then we also have our WAAFT Central site where we list all of our meetings, and we have information for people who want to start meetings, and we have like a toll-free line where people can call. And so that facilitates the growth of meetings by helping people show them how they can start meetings. Then we have our convention every 2 years, plus we have the, regional conventions that different cities do. And social media. We're all over Facebook, connected with each other. So I think that our staying connected and organized online helps grow these secular groups. Plus there's a demand. Younger people in particular, and I'm in my 50s, so to me, someone who's young could be in their 30s. They even if they're a believer, they don't necessarily need to have they don't necessarily need to have a God responsible for whether or not they drink or not. And I think a lot of people prefer a more secular approach to AA nowadays. So there's a need for what we're doing, and I think that's one reason we're growing like we are.
Sure, yeah. I've been really surprised working here at the ACA library, how many people come in and ask for, is there some kind of secular addiction services? And at first I didn't really have an answer for them, but there's a couple here in Austin.
Yep. And in Austin, Austin is one of the big cities for us for agnostic AA. One of the early pioneers of agnostic AA, Charlie Polachek, who started the first We Agnostics group in Los Angeles, moved to Austin, I think back in the 80s or whatever, and was responsible for a lot of the groups starting up out there. So there's several meetings in Austin for agnostics and atheists. And that's one reason we had our convention out there. It's a really important city to our movement.
Yeah, we're really fortunate to be here in Austin, and there's a really good secular community. There's even a group of us that are trying to get together and create a secular community center. It's an actual building. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
And addiction services would certainly be a part of that.
It's important. There's a need for it. There are other organizations out there for people who want support with getting help from addiction and alcoholism that isn't related to AA. You have like Life Ring, for example, is one of these organizations. You have Smart Recovery is another one of these. So there are organizations out there, but nothing that has the reach of AA. And I think the reason for that, Mark, is the thing about AA that makes it flourish, I think, is that it's truly a grassroots type organization. It's not top down. Anybody can start an AA meeting, and any AA meeting can be run in any way it wants. So there's no barrier to starting an AA meeting, whereas with Smart Recovery, you need to be trained to be a facilitator of Smart Recovery and all of that kind of stuff. So, and AA is very simple. It's just people who have a common problem supporting each other and their desire to not drink.
I was listening to your podcast, AA Beyond Belief, about the convention, and there was one story that piqued my curiosity, and that was you had the executive director or executive editor of the Grapevine.
Yeah.
Go ahead and tell us about the Grapevine and why she attended and how she was received.
Okay, this is really interesting. She's the executive editor publisher of the AA Grapevine, and the AA Grapevine is actually the official newsletter of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was started by Bill Wilson, one of the founders of AA. It started up in 1944, and it was meant to reflect the experience of AA members, and it was also a way for Bill W. to communicate with the rest of the fellowship at the time, which was growing by leaps and bounds. So, they didn't have the internet back then, so they had the Grapevine. And so over the years, the Grapevine has become kind of like our magazine for AA. They put out stories every month of AA members that AA members write about their experience in recovery. And they have a readership of, I can't even remember right now, but they have a very extensive readership. I know they get like 40,000 hits a month on their website, and they have millions of readers, subscriptions. But anyway, so that's the AA Grapevine. Now, the editor of the AA Grapevine was invited to our convention, and she participated on a literature panel where she talked about books that the AA Grapevine is publishing. And one of those books is a book that's dedicated to agnostics and atheists in AA, and that which should hopefully be coming out next year. She also talked about the very first edition of the Grapevine that had stories that were dedicated to agnostics and atheists in AA. And what was really unique about this, Mark, is this is the first time this is the first time that the Grapevine put together a special issue dedicated to agnostics and atheists. And these were not stories of atheists who find God. These are stories of people who have no belief in God and can make the AA program work for them. And that was a huge deal for us, because the one thing that, has always been hard for us non-believers in AA is there's a certain amount of, people that think that we need to somehow believe, and we insist that we don't. And AA doesn't ask that we believe. AA is not a religion, but a lot of AA has a culture where it's made up of people, and a lot of people in AA feel that way. So it meant a lot to us to have our stories told in the Grapevine. So she came down to our convention. There was some controversy to it, because there were some of our members weren't happy with the Grapevine, because a lot of the stories that are published talk about atheists converting and stuff like that. They saw it as not very friendly to the non-believer. Others, like myself, saw the AA Grapevine as something that was trying to change that was trying to reach out to us, as well as other underserved groups in AA. And so, anyway, there was a lot of interesting discussion from the floor that people had with the executive editor of the Grapevine. Some complaints and some compliments, and I think overall it was a good experience for the convention, for people to be able to talk to her and for her to listen. And she did. She stayed. She was at the convention throughout. She talked to people constantly. She was very accessible. It was really nice to meet her. So it was good to have her there.
This is extremely fascinating to me. I'm a historian by trade, and so I didn't know about the more of the grassroots nature of it, and I did not know that atheists and agnostics had such a part to play in the very founding of AA. We did. That's fantastic.
Absolutely, we did. And Bill Wilson himself was from New York. Okay, so we had these two groups in AA's early history. We had the New York people, and we had the Akron, Ohio people. The way that AA got started, Bill W., as a stockbroker in New York, visited Akron, Ohio. He met Dr. Bob, who was having trouble with drinking, and Bill, as a way to stay sober, needed to help another alcoholic. They got together, they met, and they formed AA. Well, the Akron people were far more into the God thing. They were far more religious than the New York people. Mm-hmm. What we say in AA was, in New York, how they would describe AA is don't drink, go to meetings, and help others. In Akron, the way they described AA was don't drink, trust God, and help others. So there's a big difference. It was a little bit more secular in New York than it was in Akron. So you always had this tension between the more secular side of AA and the more religious side of AA. And Bill W., who lived up until 1973, I believe, he evolved over time, and I think he did his best to try to make AA as inclusive as possible for everybody. And I think he succeeded to a large extent, because you don't have to believe anything in AA or do anything in AA. But we have a public relations problem, I think, because our 12 steps are definitely, they have God written all over them. And I think that people have and most of our meetings meet in churches, so people have the perception that we are religious. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I've learned something about the history. What are the plans for the future?
Well, this is what I think is going to happen in the future. AA, because it's a grassroots thing, and every group does its own thing, we don't really have a game plan as far as what we're doing as all of us together. But this is what I think is going to happen. More AA groups are going to form for agnostics and atheists. This is our groups are growing. The rest of AA is not growing right now. Our secular groups are. So there's going to be more and more meetings available for atheists and agnostics, AA meetings. There's a lot of literature out there that we're producing ourselves that deal with the AA program from a secular perspective, and there's going to be more of that written. I think that there's going to be a push to have AA itself publish literature that addresses the AA program in a secular perspective. The problem with the steps, some of our groups have rewritten the steps, taking God out of them, and that's a bit of a controversy within AA. I think that's going to become less controversial. I think that you're going to see a lot of groups that will have steps that don't include God, and AA might want to look at what we want to do about that situation. I don't think that they're ever going to change the steps, but they might want to say, hey, here's a different version that you can use if you don't want to deal with God. So I think that those are the things that's going to happen. I think that AA is going to evolve and be more friendly to the secular person, to the atheist, the agnostic, and the freethinker.
Well, I wish you all the luck in the world. Hope you succeed in those goals.
Thank you.
So you've covered some resources. If somebody's interested in getting involved, where should they go? Where's the first place they should go?
I would go to WAAFT Central, WAAFT.org would be a good place to start, just to find out, how to start a meeting. There's a phone number you can call if you want to talk to somebody and learn about secular AA. That number, I don't have it memorized, but it's on their website. That's a good place to go. You can also check out the sites AA Agnostica, that has a lot of good information about agnostic AA, and our own site, aabeyondbelief.com, which has a lot of good information. And I think with those three resources online, that's a really good start. And if you just want to learn about AA in general, aa.org, the AA website, you can learn about AA. So there you go.
Great. Fantastic. I know it's in demand. I appreciate the work that you do. Keep it up. Thanks for talking with me.
My pleasure.
And have a nice day. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, Mark. Thanks a lot. You take care.
You too. And finally, here at the Freethought Library in Austin, Texas, we are in the process of renovating our studio. We will be installing a proper green screen and upgrading our lights. Due to the disruption, and since it's the holiday season, we'll be taking a short break. We'll be back on January 7th. This is Mark Vanderbrake for the Atheist Lowdown. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, and leave your comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Happy holidays, and remember, stay secular, my friends.